The first sensation was not pain, but a terrifying weightlessness, as if I were floating in a void of absolute nothingness. Then came the smell. It was sharp, chemical, an acrid mixture of industrial bleach, rubbing alcohol, and the stale copper tang of dried blood. It assaulted my senses, dragging me violently from the darkness into a world of blinding, sterile white light. I tried to lift my hand to shield my eyes, to block out the harsh glare that felt like it was burning through my retinas, but I couldn't move. My arm refused to obey. Panic, cold and sudden, spiked in my chest. I tried to kick my legs, to roll over, to do anything, but I was paralyzed. Not by injury, but by thick, cold leather straps that bound my wrists and ankles to the metal rails of a hard, narrow bed. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog that coated my mind like thick oil. My mouth tasted of metallic ash, a side effect of whatever heavy sedative had been pumped into my veins. I tried to speak, to call out, but my throat was parched, my tongue swollen and heavy. A raspy, unintelligible croak was all that escaped my lips. Where was I? The last thing I remembered was the candlelight, the soft, flickering glow of the candles at the dinner table, the way the light danced in the deep red liquid of the vintage Merlot Richard had poured for me. It was our 5th anniversary. We were in the penthouse suite of the St. Regis, celebrating. Richard had been smiling, that charming, lopsided smile that had made me fall in love with him 6 years ago. He had toasted to us, to forever. And now? Now I was strapped to a bed in a room that looked like a scene from a horror movie. The walls were padded with beige foam, stained in places with unidentifiable dark spots. There were no windows, only a heavy steel door with a small, reinforced glass observation slit. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was deafening in the silence, a constant, buzzing drone that drilled into my skull. Suddenly, the heavy steel door hissed open. The sound was hydraulic, heavy, and final. 2 figures stepped into the room. The first was a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, imposing, with steel gray hair pulled back into a severe bun that pulled the skin of her face tight. She wore a pristine white lab coat that seemed too bright in the dingy room, but it was the man behind her who made my heart stop. It was Richard. He looked exactly as he had at dinner. He was wearing his navy blue bespoke suit, the one I had bought him for his birthday. His silk tie was perfectly knotted. He looked fresh, rested, and completely out of place in this dungeon. He walked in with a casual air, checking his gold Rolex watch, the watch I had engraved with the words, "My time is yours." He looked at me, lying helpless and bound, and his expression didn't change. There was no shock, no horror, no rush to untie me. There was only a mild, detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "Oh good, you're awake," Richard said, his voice smooth and calm, the same voice he used to order room service. "A little earlier than Dr. Thorne predicted, but you always did have a strong constitution, Maya. It's actually quite inconvenient." "Richard!" I screamed, the sound tearing at my raw throat. "Richard, what is happening? Help me! Untie these things! Where are we? Why are you just standing there?" The woman, Dr. Thorne, stepped forward, consulting a metal clipboard. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. "Mrs. Sterling, please. Agitation will only make the transition more difficult. We need you to remain calm so we can assess your baseline." "Transition?" I yelled, thrashing against the restraints until the leather bit into my skin. "What transition? Richard, tell her to let me go. This isn't funny." Richard sighed, a long, weary sound of exaggerated patience. He walked to the side of the bed and looked down at me. He didn't touch me. He put his hands in his pockets and shook his head sadly. "Maya, darling, please don't make a scene. This is exactly why we're here. The outbursts, the paranoia, the confusion. It's been getting worse for months. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to do what was best for you." "Best for me?" I stared at him, my mind reeling. "What are you talking about? I'm fine. I ran a board meeting yesterday. I closed the acquisition of Zenith Corp. I am perfectly sane." Richard turned to Dr. Thorne with a look of shared pity. "See, doctor? The delusions. She believes she's still running the company. She believes everything is normal. She has no memory of the incident last night." "Incident? What incident?" I screamed, fear starting to curdle into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "There was no incident. We had dinner. We went to the hotel. You poured the wine and then... My memory faltered. After the first sip of wine, there was nothing. Just darkness. "You drugged me," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You put something in my wine." Richard's face remained impassive, a mask of calm concern. "Paranoia, doctor," he said softly. "She thinks her own husband poisoned her. It's a classic symptom." Dr. Thorne nodded, scribbling on her chart. "Paranoid schizophrenia with acute narcissistic delusions. It's a very aggressive progression, Mr. Sterling. You were right to bring her to us. Shadow Creek Institute is the best facility for long-term containment. We will make sure she is comfortable, but she will require extensive therapy and isolation." "Containment?" I choked out the word. "Richard, look at me. Look at your wife. You know I am not crazy. You know I built Horizon Tech from the ground up. You know I am the only reason we have this life. Why are you doing this?" Richard leaned in close then. He signaled Dr. Thorne to step back. He brought his face inches from mine. I could smell his expensive cologne, a scent that used to comfort me but now made me nauseous. His eyes, usually warm brown, were flat and dead. "Because, Maya," he whispered, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "I am tired of living in your shadow. I am tired of being Mr. Maya Sterling. I am tired of asking for an allowance from the money you make. You were always the genius, the visionary, the powerful CEO, and I was just the arm candy. Well, the arm candy is hungry, Maya. And now? Now I have power of attorney. I have medical proxy. As of this morning, you have been declared mentally incompetent by 2 independent psychiatrists, Dr. Thorne and her colleague, which means I am now the acting CEO of Horizon Tech." The horror of his words washed over me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coup. A carefully orchestrated, brutal takeover of my life. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had erased me. He had declared me legally dead while I was still breathing. Richard straightened up and smoothed his tie. He looked at Dr. Thorne. "Keep her heavily sedated for the first week. I have a lot of paperwork to sign, and I don't want her making any phone calls. Not that she could, from here." Dr. Thorne smiled, a thin, cruel curving of her lips. "Don't worry, Mr. Sterling. The isolation ward has no phone lines, no internet, and the walls are lead-lined. No signal gets in or out. She is effectively off the grid." Richard nodded, satisfied. He turned to leave. "Richard!" I screamed, a raw, primal sound of despair. "You can't do this. My board will know. My lawyers will find me. Marcus will find me." Richard paused at the door. He looked back over his shoulder. "Marcus? Your head of security?" He chuckled darkly. "Who do you think drove the car that brought you here?" The door slammed shut with a deafening clang. The sound echoed in the small padded room, bouncing off the walls like a trapped bird. I heard the heavy bolts slide into place. Click, click, click. Locked. I was alone, buried alive in a white tomb. I screamed until my throat bled. I thrashed until my wrists were raw and bruised. I cried until there were no tears left, only dry, racking sobs that shook my entire body. But no one came. The buzz of the lights just kept humming, indifferent to my agony. Hours passed, maybe days. It is impossible to tell time in a room with no windows. The lights never changed. Sometimes a slot in the door would open and a tray of gray, tasteless mush would be shoved through. Sometimes a nurse would come in, a large, silent woman with arms like tree trunks, and inject something into my IV line that made the world spin, and my thoughts turned to soup. I drifted in and out of consciousness, caught in a nightmare loop of waking up, remembering the betrayal, screaming, and being sedated again. But the human mind is a resilient thing, especially mine. My father was a man who grew up on the streets of Detroit. He taught me that when you are cornered, you don't cry. You calculate, you assess, you survive. Slowly, I began to fight the drugs. I learned to fake swallowing the pills they forced into my mouth, hiding them under my tongue until they left, then spitting them into the corner of the padded floor. It wasn't easy. The withdrawal symptoms were brutal, shaking, sweating, hallucinations. But clarity began to return. The fog lifted, and with clarity came rage. Cold, hard, calculating rage. I stopped screaming. I stopped thrashing. I became the model patient. I sat quietly on my bed. I ate the slop they served. I stared at the wall. They thought I was broken. They thought the treatment was working. But I was watching. I was learning. I learned the routine of the guards. Shift change at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. I learned that the night nurse, Brenda, was lazy and often fell asleep at her station. I learned that the heavy steel door had a rhythmic weakness. It clicked 3 times before the magnetic lock engaged. And I learned about the janitor. He was an older man, stooped and gray, who came to mop the hallway outside my room every evening at exactly 6:15 p.m. He was different from the others. He didn't look at me with contempt or indifference. He didn't look at me at all. He kept his head down, his eyes fixed on the floor, moving his mop with a mechanical, defeated rhythm. But I saw his hands. They were rough, calloused, working hands, hands that had known hard labor. And I saw his eyes once, when a guard yelled at him for missing a spot. There was a flash of fear, yes, but also a deep, simmering resentment. He hated this place as much as I did. I needed an ally. I had no money, no phone, no weapons. But I had my voice, and I had the ability to read people, a skill that had made me a billionaire. One evening, as he was mopping near my door, I pressed my face to the small glass observation slit. The guard was down the hall, flirting with the receptionist. It was my only chance. "Please," I whispered. My voice was raspy from disuse. The mop paused. The old man didn't look up, but his shoulders stiffened. He had heard me. I didn't say, "Help me." I didn't say, "I'm innocent." Everyone in here said that. It was white noise to the staff. I said something else. I said, "You have a family, don't you?" He froze. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he turned his head. His eyes met mine through the thick glass. They were watery, tired eyes, surrounded by deep wrinkles of worry. "Who are you?" he mouthed, his lips barely moving. "I am a mother," I lied. I needed to forge a connection, a bond stronger than money. "I have a daughter. Her name is Sarah. She is waiting for me, and they took me from her." The man's face softened. Pain flickered across his features. "I have a daughter too," he whispered back, checking over his shoulder to ensure the guard was still distracted. "Her name is Lily. She is sick. She needs medicine. That's why I work in this hellhole." Lily. A name. A weakness. A lever. "Listen to me," I whispered, speaking fast and low. "My name is Maya Sterling. I am the owner of Horizon Tech. You have seen me on the news?" He squinted, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The tech lady? The billionaire?" "Yes," I said. "My husband locked me in here to steal my money. He is stealing everything. But if I get out, if I even get a message out, I can help you. I can help Lily. I can pay for her medicine. I can pay for the best doctors in the world. I can change your life. But you have to help me." The man looked terrified. He shook his head, gripping the mop handle until his knuckles turned white. "I can't. They watch everything. Cameras, microphones. If they catch me talking to you, I lose this job. Lily dies." "They don't watch the blind spots," I said, my mind racing, remembering the layout of the yard I had seen during my brief, supervised exercise periods. "In the courtyard, behind the old oak tree. The camera doesn't swivel that far." I checked. "It has a 10-second delay. Meet me there tomorrow, during yard time. Please. For Lily." He didn't answer. He just started mopping again, moving away from my door as the guard turned around. I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding against my ribs. Had I reached him? Or had I just doomed myself? The next day, during yard time, I walked the perimeter of the high chain-link fence. The other patients shuffled around aimlessly, lost in their own worlds. I kept my eyes on the ground, counting the seconds of the camera's rotation. 1, 2, 3, 10. Swivel. I walked to the oak tree. I stood in the shadow of its trunk, pretending to tie my shoe. And then, he was there. He was emptying a trash can near the tree. He didn't look at me. He spoke to the air. "My name is Elias," he muttered. "What do you need?" "I need a phone," I said. "Just for 1 minute, just to send a location." "Impossible," Elias hissed. "Metal detectors at the staff entrance. They search our bags." "Then bring me the parts," I said. Horizon Tech built the world's most advanced smartphones. I knew the architecture of a transmitter better than I knew the back of my hand. Bring me e-waste, old radios, broken toys, anything with a battery, copper wire, and a circuit board. I can build a signal booster. I can send a distress ping on a secure frequency. My security team monitors it. If they see the ping, they will come. Elias looked at me like I was insane. "You can build a transmitter out of trash?" "I am an engineer, Elias," I said, my voice steel. "I can build a bomb out of a toaster if I have to. Bring me the parts. Hide them in the laundry cart. Monday is sheet change day. Do it." Monday came. The waiting was agony. Every time the door opened, I expected Dr. Thorne to come in with a lobotomy kit. But finally, the laundry cart rattled down the hall. Brenda threw a bundle of stiff white sheets onto my bed. "Change them yourself, princess," she sneered, and slammed the door. I waited until her footsteps faded. I ripped the bundle open. My hands shook. There, wrapped in a pillowcase, was a collection of junk. A cracked circuit board from an old walkie-talkie, a 9-volt battery, a coil of copper wire, a soldering iron tip, just the tip, and a lighter. It was garbage. But to me, it was gold. It was hope. I worked at night. I huddled under my blanket, using my body to block the glow of the lighter as I heated the soldering tip. I stripped the wires with my teeth. I bridged the connections on the circuit board, my fingers raw and blistered. I had to modify the frequency of the walkie-talkie board to broadcast on the 400 megahertz emergency band. It was delicate work. One wrong connection and the battery would short out. One mistake and I would be left with nothing. For 3 nights I worked. During the day, I was a zombie. I stared at the wall. I drooled. I let them think their drugs had turned my brain to mush. But at night, I was Maya Sterling, CEO, engineer, architect of my own salvation. On the 4th night, it was finished. It looked like a monstrosity, a tangle of wires and plastic tape, but when I connected the battery, a tiny red LED flickered to life. It had power. Now, I just needed to send the signal. I knew the code. It was a silent alarm protocol I had designed for my executives. 3 short pulses, 3 long pulses, 3 short pulses, SOS, followed by my unique ID code. I crawled to the corner of the room, furthest from the door. I held the device up to the ceiling, praying that the signal would penetrate the lead-lined walls. I pressed the makeshift button. Click, 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 click. I waited. The red light blinked steadily. It was transmitting. Somewhere, in the server room of Horizon Tech, a red light should be flashing on a console. Marcus should be seeing it. He should be mobilizing the team. But then, the door to my room exploded inward. Light flooded the dark cell. I scrambled to hide the device, shoving it under the mattress, but it was too late. Dr. Thorne stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hallway lights. She wasn't alone. 4 large orderlies stood behind her, holding stun batons. And Richard. Richard was there too. He looked furious. He walked into the room, kicking the mattress aside. He grabbed the device, ripping the wires loose. He held it up, looking at it with a mixture of anger and admiration. "Clever girl," he sneered. "You actually built a radio. Did you think we wouldn't notice? Did you think we don't monitor the RF spectrum in this building? We saw the spike the moment you connected the battery." Richard threw the device against the wall. It shattered into 100 pieces. My heart shattered with it. "No!" I screamed, lunging for him. "You bastard!" Richard backhanded me. The force of the blow knocked me to the floor. I tasted blood. He grabbed my hair, pulling my face up to look at him. "You are becoming a liability, Maya. I tried to be nice. I tried to give you a peaceful retirement in this room, but you just won't quit, will you?" Dr. Thorne stepped forward. She was holding a syringe, but this one was different. It was larger. The liquid inside was a dark, ominous amber. "We can't risk this again, Mr. Sterling," she said coldly. "She needs the quiet room." The quiet room. The name alone made the other patients shudder. I had heard rumors: sensory deprivation, electroshock, psychological deconstruction. It was a place where they didn't just break your will, they erased your soul. "No, Richard, please," I begged, clutching at his pant leg. "Not the quiet room. I'll stop. I promise I'll stop. Just let me stay here." Richard kicked my hand away. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking at me with pure disgust. "You had your chance, Maya. Now? Now you need to be reprogrammed. Take her." The orderlies grabbed me. They dragged me out of the cell, my bare feet scraping against the cold linoleum. I screamed Elias's name. I screamed for Marcus. I screamed until the needle went into my neck. And then, the world didn't just go black, it disintegrated. I woke up in hell. The quiet room wasn't quiet. That was the cruelest irony. It was a chamber of sensory overload designed to induce madness. I was strapped to a chair in the center of a circular room. The walls were covered in acoustic foam that absorbed sound, making my own breathing sound like a hurricane. But then the speakers would turn on. High-pitched screeches, low, thrumming bass that vibrated my internal organs, distorted voices whispering my name. Maya. Failure. Maya. Crazy. The lights were strobe lights, flashing at irregular intervals, destroying my depth perception, making me vomit from vertigo. I lost all sense of time. Was it day? Night? Had I been there an hour or a year? They stopped feeding me solid food. I was kept alive by an IV drip. I hallucinated. I saw my father standing in the corner, looking disappointed. I saw Richard laughing, his face melting like wax. I saw myself, dead and rotting in a grave. Dr. Thorne would come in over the intercom. "Just sign the papers, Maya." Her voice echoed around the room, godlike and terrifying. "Sign the irrevocable trust over to Richard, and the noise will stop. The lights will stop. You can sleep. Just sign." I knew what they wanted. Richard had power of attorney, but the family trust, the entity that actually owned the majority shares of Horizon Tech, required my physical signature for transfer. It was the failsafe my father had built, and it was the only reason I was still alive. If I signed, I was dead. I bit my tongue. I recited mathematical formulas. I designed buildings in my head. I built bridges, skyscrapers, cities. I retreated into the fortress of my own mind, locking the doors against the madness they were trying to pour in. "I will not break," I chanted to myself. "I will not break." But everyone breaks eventually. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. The strobe lights stopped. The noise cut out. The silence was deafening. Richard walked in. He looked different. He was wearing a tuxedo. He looked excited, manic even. Behind him, Dr. Thorne looked exhausted, her hair fraying. "Today is the day, Maya," Richard announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. He held up a tablet. On the screen, I saw a live feed. It was a press conference. My press conference room. A banner hung behind the podium. Horizon Tech plus Omnicorp merger. Richard smiled, a predator baring his teeth. "I am selling the company today, Maya. To our biggest competitor. For pennies on the dollar. I'm cashing out. Billions. And I'm going to live on an island where no one knows your name. But the lawyers are being sticky. They want the trust transfer signed before the merger closes. Today. Now." He placed a document on the table in front of me. He placed a gold pen in my shaking hand. "Sign it, Maya, or Dr. Thorne gives you a lobotomy. Right here, right now. She has the tools ready." I looked at the scalpel on the tray next to Dr. Thorne. I looked at Richard. I looked at the pen. I was broken. I was starving. I was hallucinating. I couldn't fight anymore. I gripped the pen. My hand trembled. I touched the tip to the paper. "Good girl," Richard whispered. "Just sign." And then, a sound. A dull thud from outside the room, then another, then a shout. Not a scream of a patient, a shout of a command. "Clear! Move! Move!" The door to the quiet room exploded.
The explosion that shattered the door of the quiet room was not just a sound, it was a physical force that knocked the air from my lungs. Debris and smoke filled the small circular chamber, swirling in the strobing lights like a chaotic storm. Through the haze, silhouettes emerged, men in tactical gear, moving with the precision of a surgical team. Red laser sights cut through the dust, dancing across the walls, across the terrified face of Dr. Thorne, and finally settling on Richard's chest. He froze, the gold pen still hovering over the paper, his mouth open in a silent scream of disbelief. "Drop the weapon!" A voice roared from the smoke. It was deep, gravelly, and the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Marcus. My head of security, the man who had served with my father in the military, the man who had sworn to protect me with his life. Richard dropped the pen as if it were burning hot. He raised his hands, stammering, "Wait! I am the CEO! This is my wife! She is sick!" But the tactical team didn't care about his title. 2 men rushed forward, slamming Richard against the padded wall. Dr. Thorne tried to run, clutching her tray of instruments, but she was tackled before she could take 2 steps. The strobe lights were shot out, replaced by the steady white beams of tactical flashlights. Marcus stepped through the smoke. He wasn't wearing his usual black suit. He was wearing a tactical vest, carrying an assault rifle, his face smeared with soot and grim determination. He looked like an avenging angel. He scanned the room, his eyes wild until they landed on me. I was still strapped to the chair, bruised, emaciated, wearing a filthy hospital gown. "Maya," he breathed, rushing to my side. He holstered his weapon and pulled out a knife to cut the leather straps binding my wrists. His hands, usually so steady, were shaking slightly. "My God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry we took so long." The straps fell away. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out. Marcus caught me, holding me up effortlessly. "You came!" I sobbed, burying my face in his vest, the smell of gunpowder and sweat replacing the stench of the asylum. "Elias, the photo." "We got it," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "We got the GPS tag from the image metadata. We tore the gates down. We have Elias. He's safe. He's outside with the team." Richard was shouting, struggling against the men holding him. "You can't do this. This is kidnapping. I have a press conference. The merger! The merger!" The words cut through my trauma like a knife. I looked at the tablet on the table, miraculously undamaged. The live feed was still playing. The podium was empty, the banner for the Horizon Tech and Omnicorp merger hanging like a shroud over my company. The press was waiting. The world was watching. And Richard. Richard was supposed to be there. A fire, hotter and brighter than any rage I had ever felt, ignited in my chest. It burned away the fear. It burned away the weakness. I pushed myself away from Marcus, standing on my own trembling legs. I looked at Richard, pinned against the wall. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with fear. "Maya, baby, please," he whimpered, switching tactics instantly. "You don't understand. The stress..." I wasn't thinking clearly. "Dr. Thorne, she manipulated me. She said you were sick. I was just trying to help." I walked over to him. I was barefoot, bleeding, wearing rags, but I felt like a giant. I leaned in close so only he could hear. "You didn't break me, Richard," I whispered, my voice raspy but steady. "You just forged me into steel." I turned to Marcus. "Get me a phone, and get me to that press conference." Marcus looked at me, concerned. "Maya, you need a hospital. You're in shock. You need a doctor." "I don't need a doctor," I screamed, the sound echoing in the ruined room. "I need my life back." "He tried to steal everything, Marcus. He tried to erase me. I am going to take it back. Live on air. I want the world to see what he did." Marcus stared at me for a second, then nodded slowly. He saw the look in my eyes, the same look my father had when he faced down the mob to build his first factory. He spoke into his headset. "Alpha 1 to air support. We have the package. We are diverting to Horizon HQ. ETA 15 minutes. Get the chopper ready." We left Richard and Dr. Thorne zip-tied in the quiet room, guarded by 2 of Marcus's men. I didn't want them arrested yet. I wanted them to wait. I wanted Richard to watch his empire crumble from the very cell he had built for me. We boarded the helicopter on the asylum lawn. As we lifted off, I watched the Shadow Creek Institute shrink below me. It looked like a fortress of evil, a place where secrets went to die. But now, it was just a building, and I was free. Marcus handed me a tablet and a headset. "We hacked the feed," one of his tech guys said over the comms. "We can patch you into the giant screen behind the podium in the press room. Just give the word." I looked at the screen. The press conference was in chaos. The moderator was trying to calm the reporters, saying Mr. Sterling had been detained by an urgent matter but would be there shortly. They were stalling. Perfect. I caught my reflection in the helicopter window. I looked like a ghost. My hair was matted, my face gaunt, my eyes sunken. Marcus offered me a jacket to cover the hospital gown. I took it, but then I stopped. "No," I said, handing it back. "I want them to see. I want them to see exactly what the doting husband did to his wife." The helicopter touched down on the roof of Horizon Tech 15 minutes later. The wind whipped my gown around my legs. I felt alive. I felt dangerous. We took the private executive elevator down to the auditorium level. My security team cleared the way, moving with efficient brutality. No one stopped us. The few employees we passed shrank against the walls, terrified by the sight of armed men and their CEO looking like she had crawled out of a grave. We reached the backstage wings. I could hear the murmur of the crowd. The moderator was speaking again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Mr. Sterling is delayed. However, we have the CEO of Omnicorp here to answer some preliminary questions." The CEO of Omnicorp, a vulture named Mr. Vance, stepped up to the podium. He smiled a shark-like grin. "This merger is a historic moment," he began. "Horizon Tech has always been a leader, and with Maya Sterling stepping down due to health reasons, that was my cue. Now," I whispered into the headset. Suddenly, the massive screen behind Mr. Vance, which had been displaying the company logos, flickered violently. Static screeched through the audio system, making everyone cover their ears. The room went silent. Then, the feed switched. It wasn't me on the screen. It was the photo Elias had taken. A grainy, high-contrast image of me, terrified, being dragged by orderlies, screaming inside a padded cell. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Vance froze, turning to look at the screen. His jaw dropped. "What is this?" he stammered. "Cut the feed. Someone cut the feed." "Don't bother," I said. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. The silence in the room was so absolute, so heavy, that my voice carried from the wings like a thunderclap. I walked out onto the stage. I walked slowly, my bare feet making no sound on the polished floor. The stage lights blinded me for a moment, but I didn't blink. I walked past the stunned Mr. Vance, who backed away as if I were radioactive. I stood behind the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, reporters, board members, investors. I saw the shock, the horror, the confusion. Cameras flashed blindingly, a wall of white light. I gripped the sides of the podium. My knuckles were white. I looked directly into the main camera, knowing that this feed was being broadcast to the world, and most importantly, to the tablet in the quiet room where Richard was watching. "I am not sick," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, steady and cold as ice. "And I am not stepping down, unless you count stepping down from the hell my husband put me in." I held up my wrist, showing the raw, bloody marks from the restraints. I pulled down the collar of my gown, revealing the bruise from the needle. "Look closely," I commanded. "This is what a hostile takeover looks like. Richard Sterling didn't just try to sell this company, he tried to sell me. He committed me to a black site asylum. He paid a corrupt doctor to drug me. He forged my signature. He declared me insane to steal my legacy." A murmur of outrage rippled through the crowd. Phones were out, recording every second. This was the scoop of the century. Mr. Vance tried to intervene. "Mrs. Sterling, this is clearly a personal matter. We should discuss this privately." I turned to him. "There is no privacy when you try to steal a billion-dollar company, Mr. Vance. Did you know? Did you know he locked me up? Or were you just happy to get the discount?" Vance paled. I had no idea. "Then get off my stage," I snapped. He fled. I turned back to the crowd, but I wasn't done. I had one more bomb to drop, one more piece of evidence that Marcus had handed me in the helicopter. A recording. The recording from the bug I had planted in Richard's office months ago, not for this, but because I had suspected an affair. It turned out to be so much worse. I played the audio file into the microphone. Richard's voice filled the auditorium. "She's too smart, Thorne. If she wakes up, she'll fight. Just give her the maximum dose. Turn her into a vegetable if you have to. I just need her hand to move long enough to sign the trust. Once I have the money, she can rot in there forever." The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, people standing up in fury. The board members who had supported Richard looked like they wanted to vomit. I looked at the camera again. "Richard, I know you're watching," I said, a cruel smile playing on my lips. "You wanted the spotlight? You wanted to be the sun? Well, here it is. Burn." I ripped the merger contract in half, and then I threw the pieces into the air like confetti. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The police were coming. Not for me. For the man who thought he could bury Maya Sterling. I stepped back from the podium as the doors burst open, but this time, it wasn't enemies. It was justice.
The sirens were deafening, a cacophony of justice wailing outside the glass walls of the Horizon Tech headquarters. Inside the auditorium, the chaos was absolute, a swirling storm of flashbulbs, shouting reporters, and panicked executives. I stood on the stage, the torn pieces of the merger contract scattered around my bare feet like fallen leaves, watching the empire Richard tried to steal crumble before the eyes of the world. The CEO of Omnicorp, Mr. Vance, had already fled the stage, his legal team surrounding him like a shield, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the revelations I had just broadcast. But I didn't care about Vance. I cared about the man sitting in the dark, zip-tied to a chair in a padded room miles away, watching his life disintegrate on a tablet screen. I could almost feel Richard scream across the city, a silent vibration of pure, unadulterated rage. I stepped down from the podium, my legs finally beginning to tremble, as the adrenaline that had fueled my escape began to ebb away. Marcus was there instantly, his arm a solid weight around my shoulders, holding me up. "We need to go, Maya," he said, his voice low and protective. "The police are securing the building, but this is going to turn into a circus. You need medical attention." I nodded, letting him guide me off the stage. I didn't look back at the cameras. I had said what I needed to say. The footage of my torture, the audio of Richard's betrayal, the sight of my bruises. It was all etched into the public consciousness now. There was no spinning this. There was no PR firm in the world that could fix what Richard had done. We took the elevator up to the roof, back to the helicopter. As we lifted off, leaving the flashing lights of the police cars below, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, and finally, for the first time in weeks, I closed my eyes and let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of exhaustion, of the sheer, overwhelming realization that I had survived. I spent the next week in a private wing of St. Jude's Hospital, surrounded by nurses who spoke in hushed tones, and doctors who treated my injuries with gentle reverence. The detox was brutal. Dr. Thorne had pumped my system full of heavy antipsychotics and sedatives, and getting them out of my blood felt like having the flu and a panic attack simultaneously. I shook. I sweated. I woke up screaming from nightmares where the strobe lights of the quiet room were flashing behind my eyelids. But I wasn't alone. Marcus sat by my bed every night, guarding the door as if he expected Richard to burst in with a syringe. And Elias came too. After the police raided the asylum and arrested Richard and Dr. Thorne, Marcus had brought Elias to the hospital. He looked different in clean clothes, shaven and rested, but his eyes still held the shadow of the things we had seen. He sat in the chair next to Marcus, holding a cup of coffee, and we didn't need to speak. We were soldiers from the same war, bound by the silence of the trenches. The news was playing on the TV in the corner, muted. I watched the footage of Richard being led out of the Shadow Creek Institute in handcuffs. He didn't look like the arrogant CEO anymore. He looked small, pale, and terrified. He was shouting at the reporters, claiming he was innocent, claiming I was the crazy one, but no one was listening. The facade had cracked. The monster was exposed. When I was finally discharged, I didn't go home. I couldn't go back to the house I had shared with Richard, the house where he had drugged my wine and lied to my face. I moved into a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons while my legal team went to work, and they were ruthless. I hired the most aggressive forensic accountants and criminal defense attorneys in the country. We tore Richard's life apart piece by piece. We found the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands where he had been siphoning my money for years. We found the emails between him and Dr. Thorne, detailing the bribes he paid her to keep me sedated. $50,000 a month to turn a healthy woman into a zombie. We found the forgery software on his laptop that he had used to fake my signature on the power of attorney documents. It was a mountain of evidence, a monument to his greed. But the sweetest victory was the office. The day I returned to Horizon Tech, 3 weeks after the press conference, the lobby was silent. I walked in, not in a hospital gown, but in a sharp, tailored white suit that cost more than Richard's car. I wore sunglasses to hide the lingering dark circles under my eyes, but my head was held high. The receptionist, a young woman who had always been kind to me, stood up and clapped. Then the security guards clapped. Then the engineers coming out of the elevators. It wasn't a polite golf clap, it was a thunderous ovation. I walked past them, nodding my thanks, and took the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was waiting. The board members, the old men who had sided with Richard, who had nodded along while he called me unstable, who had been ready to sell my legacy for a quick payout, were sitting around the mahogany table. They looked like schoolboys waiting for the principal. I didn't sit. I threw a stack of files onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room, "these are your resignation letters. You have 5 minutes to sign them. If you don't, I will release the emails where you discussed my unfortunate condition and joked about the stock price going up after I was committed. I will sue you for negligence, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. I will strip you of every penny you have and bury you in legal fees for the rest of your lives." They didn't argue. They didn't try to negotiate. Hands trembling, faces pale, they signed one by one. By noon, the boardroom was empty. I stood at the head of the table, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. I was the sole authority of Horizon Tech again. But the war wasn't over. The trial was the final battle. It was dubbed the trial of the century. The courtroom was packed every single day. People camped out on the courthouse steps just to get a glimpse of the proceedings. Richard's defense team, paid for by the last dregs of his frozen assets, tried everything. They tried to claim he was manipulated by Dr. Thorne. They tried to claim I really was mentally ill and that the abuse was a delusion fabricated by my trauma. They tried to paint Richard as a loving, desperate husband who had made a tough choice to save his sick wife. It was a disgusting display of victim blaming, but they forgot one thing. They forgot Elias. On the final day of testimony, the prosecution called their star witness. The courtroom doors opened and Elias walked in. He walked with a new confidence. He took the stand, swore on the Bible, and looked directly at Richard. Richard refused to meet his eyes. Elias told the jury everything. He told them about the note I dropped. He told them about the screams he heard coming from the quiet room while he was mopping the floors. He told them about the bribes Richard paid the hospital staff to look the other way. Then, the defense attorney, a slick man with a shark smile, tried to destroy him. "Mr. Elias," he sneered, "you are a convicted thief, aren't you? You have a criminal record. You stole from your previous employer. Why should the jury believe a janitor over a respected businessman?" Elias didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone. "I made mistakes in my past," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I stole food and medicine to feed my daughter because I couldn't afford it. I broke the law to save a life. Mr. Sterling broke the law to destroy one. He stole his wife's mind. He stole her freedom, and he paid me to stay quiet. But I couldn't, because I saw a woman fighting for her life in that cell, and I knew, if I didn't help her, I was no better than the men locking the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, the drawing of the blue jay I had returned to him through the glass. Mrs. Sterling told me she would help me get my daughter back. She was in hell, being tortured, and she was thinking about my little girl. That is not a crazy woman. That is a hero. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge looked moved. Richard slumped in his chair, defeated. The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, fraud, embezzlement, unlawful imprisonment. The judge was merciless. He sentenced Richard to 40 years in a maximum security federal prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Dr. Thorne, in exchange for her testimony against Richard, got 25 years. They would both die in cages, just like the ones they had put me in. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I drove my car up a winding road to a small house in the suburbs. It wasn't a mansion. It was a cozy yellow house with a white picket fence and a big oak tree in the front yard. A tree that reminded me of the one Elias and I used to meet behind. I got out of the car, holding a gift box. A little girl was playing in the yard, chasing a butterfly with joyous shrieks. A man was sitting on the porch, watching her with a smile that reached his eyes. Elias stood up when he saw me. He walked down the steps and hugged me tight. "She's beautiful, Elias," I said, watching Sarah play. "She's home," Elias said, tears glistening in his eyes. "Because of you. The lawyers you hired, they cleared my record. They got me custody. I have my life back, Maya. You gave me mine back first," I said. I handed him the box. He opened it. Inside was a set of keys. "What is this?" he asked, looking confused. "The deed to this house," I said. "It's yours, Elias. Paid in full. And there's a college fund set up for Sarah. You never have to mop a floor again unless you want to. You are the head of maintenance at the new facility I'm opening, if you want the job." He tried to refuse, tried to say it was too much, but I wouldn't let him. We sat on the porch for a while, watching Sarah play, two survivors who had found light in the darkest of places. Later that afternoon, I had one last stop to make. I walked into the visitation room of the federal penitentiary. It was cold, gray, and smelled of bleach, a smell that used to trigger panic attacks, but now just smelled like justice. I sat down on the metal stool. On the other side of the reinforced glass, Richard was brought in. He looked terrible. His hair was graying and thinning. His skin was sallow. He had lost weight, his prison uniform hanging loosely on his frame. He looked like an old man. He sat down and picked up the phone. I picked up mine. "You look good, Maya," he said, his voice hollow and scratchy. "I am good, Richard," I said. "Horizon Tech stock is up 30%. We just launched the new AI platform, the one you said I wasn't smart enough to build." He flinched. "Why are you here? To gloat? To laugh at me?" "No," I said. "I'm here to give you something." I reached into my bag and pulled out a piece of paper. I pressed it against the glass so he could read it. It was a receipt. A bill of sale. He squinted at it. "What is this?" he asked. "I bought Shadow Creek," I said. "The asylum. I bought the building last week." Richard's eyes widened. "What? Why?" "I shut it down," I continued, enjoying the look of confusion on his face. "I fired the staff. I released the patients who were wrongly committed and got them real help. And the building? I'm turning it into a shelter for victims of domestic abuse. It's going to be a place of healing, Richard, not a prison. It's going to be named the Sarah Center, after Elias's daughter." I leaned in close to the glass, my eyes locking with his. "I just thought you should know," I whispered. "The place where you tried to bury me is now the place where women like me will rise. You built a tomb, Richard. I turned it into a fortress. And every time you close your eyes in this cell, I want you to remember that I won." I hung up the phone. I stood up and smoothed my suit. "Maya, wait," Richard shouted, banging his fist on the glass. "Don't leave me here. I'm sorry. I love you. Maya!" I didn't look back. I walked out of the prison, into the bright, blinding sunlight. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted like freedom. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. I was Maya Sterling. I was a CEO. I was a survivor. And I was finally, truly sane. The nightmare was over. The dream had just begun.